got a new haircut. Hello. Look. Wow. So cute. Hey everyone, welcome to another video. In today's video, I'll be doing my June wrap-up of all the books and movies that I watched during this month. Once again, I didn't do a great job in the reading department for the month of June. I officially finished one book, but I did start a few. I will include the first book that I have here, which is Verge by Lidia. How do you say this name? Yuknavitch. First of all, beautiful cover. Look at that beauty. I definitely picked this book up solely because, well, I have seen it circulating around BookTube, but I did see it at the bookstore and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm completely drawn to this cover because it's so beautiful. It's a collection of short stories, and no, this is not the book that I finished in the month of June, but I did start it. I'm almost finished, so I only have this much left. It's quite an odd read. A lot of the short stories can be a little bit more surreal. Each of the stories follows like very, how should I say, like individuals that are kind of overlooked by society. They're kind of like the misfits, people that you rarely get point of views from. So in that sense, it was a very interesting insight into these individual characters. Would I say I enjoyed the short stories, at least of what I read so far? Most of them, unfortunately, no. This was kind of a disappointing short story collection. There are a few in here that's quite memorable and I did like, but majority of them I wasn't the biggest fan of. It was interesting. I feel like the bad thing about this is that a lot of the characters here really suffer the brutality of life, and so I'm just like, I don't know if I'm into this. It's like very raw, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I wasn't enjoying a lot of the short stories, and even though this cover is like the most beautiful thing ever published, I will say my favorite, let me just go to the contents page. My favorite short stories, oddly enough, were, well, the first two called The Pool, The Organ Runner, and I think I also liked, actually Cosmos was a little bit weird, but I did enjoy the surrealism of it. The ending was a bit weird, but I kind of liked it as this bigger metaphor. So Cosmos was good. A Woman Refusing was also really good. How many short stories did I read? There are more than 12 short stories, obviously, but 12 of the short stories that I've read from, I only enjoyed 4 of them. So it's safe to say that this wasn't my favorite short story collection. Who knows? I still have, how many do I have left? I still have 8 short stories left in this collection. So hopefully the later third of this book maybe might impress me. I don't know. This cover's beautiful though. I'm so sad. I was really rooting for this to be like one of my new favorite short story collections. Short stories are hard though. I haven't rated it yet because I haven't finished it. Interesting read. Next book that I finished, the only book that I finished, I mean, is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. How should I say this? I'm a little disappointed. I'm probably gonna do a dedicated review on this book, not because I enjoyed it, but because I had certain opinions about it. I definitely think I had a lot of hype when I went into this book. I definitely had my expectations a bit too high. Basically, this is set in the 1920s. One of my favorite eras in history, actually, there's a lot of eras in history, but 1920s, that was the decade of decadence, of very beautiful fashion, stunning music. It was a good decade, so I was really intrigued. This was also set in Shanghai. Growing up, it might sound a bit weird to say, but I really liked movies and like stories following like gang groups. As you can already tell by the title, it's a quote from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and of course it's following 2 rival gang groups in Shanghai in the 1920s. So I thought that this was gonna be so good. It had a lot of the buzzwords that I liked. Romeo and Juliet isn't my favorite Shakespeare, but I definitely think you can do a lot of interesting stuff if you do like a retelling of that story. But you know, I had high expectations. Let me just say I was disappointed by it. I'm so sorry. I wanted to love this one so much, but I think this was also the reason why I went into quite a bit of a reading slump. I was definitely like really pushing myself through this book in the month of June. Like, it was a hard time. I definitely think that it was more slow. They had this fantastical aspect interwoven into the story, so there's something a little bit more supernatural going on top of this blood feud between these two big rival gangs in Shanghai. There's also this mysterious plague that is rampaging the city. So our two main characters from each rival gang group, we're kind of following them, trying to unravel this mystery behind this mysterious plague. And so I just was not interested. I definitely feel like if this book focused more on like the blood feud between the gangs, made it a bit more political instead of adding this supernatural fantastical element to the story. And that's saying something, because I really like the supernatural and fantastical aspects in a lot of my fiction, but in this case I think it would have been a bit more better if it was more grounded in realism instead of adding this other element. I definitely feel like that made this novel a little bit more convoluted because it had the sickness mystery going on, it had the blood feud, it also had like a political aspects between like communist parties and like all these other groups inside Shanghai that are trying to mark their territory. So it was just a lot of different plot elements that I definitely feel like it didn't have enough time to focus solely on a solid plot line. It was a rough time reading this book, and I thought going into this book that it was going to be a standalone, but apparently it's a duology. Honestly, because this book was such a struggle to read through, I'm not very interested in reading the sequel to this, even though it is a duology, unless I hear like amazing things about the sequel, which I don't know if I will. Aside from not really enjoying the story as a whole, the characters were alright, but again, kind of bland. I also didn't really end up liking the writing style, which was a surprise because when I read the prologue, I really liked Chloe Gong's writing style, but as I kept reading on, it didn't feel, how should I say, I felt like Chloe Gong tried to make her writing a lot more eloquent. It tried a little bit too hard to use like more fancier words. I feel like some words that she used where she tried to make it more flowery, more beautiful, it just clashed a little bit. I don't know what it is about her writing style, but I just didn't vibe well with. I don't know why, because the prologue and the first few pages of the book, the writing was really good, and then as it went on, I think it tried too hard to be very poetic and very lyrical, but at the end of the day it wasn't. That sounds harsh to say, but yeah, it just didn't vibe well with me, and I ended up not liking it even more because of the writing style. And honestly, I feel bad because I really wanted to like this. The concept was very intriguing and it was by an Asian author. I don't really read enough books by Asian authors, which I'm trying to be a bit more better at this year, but you know, it's kind of disappointing that this didn't fly well with me. At the end, I was a little bit more generous with these Violent Delights because I did give it a 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. If I could do half stars, it's probably about 2.5. I did like certain elements, but a lot of things I had issues with, like the writing, the characters were a little boring. Even though it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, I liked how it focused not solely on the romance, but you would expect it to have more flair in the romantic aspect as well. I didn't really see much chemistry between the Romeo and Juliet character. Also, the plot line was too confusing, messy is what I should say. But I will be doing a more in-depth review on this, just elaborating more on my thoughts on it. So yeah, I did also start On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, but I ended up leaving that book on a train. I am super bummed about it. I did file in like a lost property request, but I don't think I'm getting that book back. I probably need to just buy another copy, but so sad. I'm actually really devastated because I was really enjoying it. I don't think I can continue on with it until I get another copy, or if it gets found, who knows, but I highly doubt it. It was in like a book bag. I'm more upset about losing the book bag. Like, I can always buy another copy of that book, but the book bag was like an Outcrate exclusive book bag and it was so pretty. I'm very sad about losing a book. It's the first time I've ever lost a book. Anyway, these are the 2 books I ended up reading in the month of June. Well, I've only finished one of these and the other one I'm still gonna continue on. I will now move on to all the movies that I watched in the month of June. If you've seen my May wrap up, I did watch a lot of horror movies, and this dark sort of theme kind of trickled into June. I did not watch anything happy. I don't know, something about winter. It makes me want to gravitate more towards like darker movies, darker reads, either sad or like scary or like mystery thrillers. I don't know, that genre is like my thing generally, and also when the months are colder. It is chilly. We're currently in lockdown again. There's nothing more to do than watch a bunch of movies. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on to the first thing that I watched in the month of June, which was Wrath of Man. This movie came out this year. It's directed by Guy Ritchie. It's definitely hit and miss for me with Guy Ritchie films. My favorite is Snatched by him. I do like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. I did like the Arthur, like the King Arthur movie that he made. I know that it didn't get received well. I just like Arthurian legend stuff, and I appreciated like the action sequences and the visual effects in that movie. It's not a great movie, but it's kind of like a guilty pleasure. But Wrath of Man, it kind of doesn't really fall under my loves category for Guy Ritchie. It's definitely an average read. I did appreciate some action sequences. It's almost a heist film as well as like an action slash revenge story following our main character, who's played by Jason Statham. I assume that Jason Statham's character is like a criminal. He's not a good guy, but at the beginning of the film it's a bit more mysterious of who he is because he has all these set of skills. He basically works for a cash truck company. They're basically kind of like delivery men, but they're delivering like huge amounts of money, like millions of dollars. And so the story is like a lot of these trucks usually get hijacked or like they get robbed. And so our main character, when these trucks end up getting targeted, he's like picking off the criminals one by one. And he's also trying to unravel his own mystery and the reason why he joined this company. We don't know what's going on. It seems like he's a lot more skilled than he leads on. It's got a very simple premise. How should I say? It's a very manly film. There's a lot of guns. There's a lot of brutality. It's not my favorite of Guy Ritchie's for sure. It's a little bit lackluster. I gave it 3 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. Look, if you don't want to think too much about a movie, if you want some heist movie with a bit of action and revenge plotline, this is the movie for you. And if you like Guy Ritchie's style, you might like it too. I would also say that there are a few plot elements that are a little bit surprising. I definitely feel like it gave a little bit more excitement. You couldn't really guess towards the later half of the movie how this was going to unravel. There's a lot of elements where it kind of makes you think that it's going this one direction and you feel like, okay, it's going to be predictable. The reveal is going to be this and that, but it kind of turns it on its head a little bit. Definitely think that that was a little clever, but overall it was average. Like, I wasn't really blown away by this movie, if you know what I mean. At the end of the day, didn't really enjoy it as much, but I was entertained. The next movie that I watched in the month of June was Cure, and this is directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, and this was first released in 1997. This is a crime mystery thriller. It's a weird one. It's a Japanese movie. It's filmed in a way that's very beautiful. I feel like the opening sequence of this movie is very contrasting and very shocking, where it's quite memorable. It is this crime noir kind of feel. You have this group of gruesome murders that are happening in the city. You're following a detective trying to solve this mystery, and what's very interesting and different about these murders that are occurring is that there are multiple different killers that are killing in the exact same way, and the murderer is always found near the victim, and they're kind of a bit, you know, not with it in their heads. So there's something fishy going on. It almost feels like it might be something supernatural. If you ever get a chance to watch this movie, it's a little weird, but it's kind of understandable when you watch it. It's more grounded than it appears to be, because when you think of this, you feel like it's gonna be something supernatural. Oh, it's Japanese horror, but no, it's not anything supernatural. It's more of a psychological crime thriller. I really enjoyed it. I definitely think that this film had a very interesting doing an intriguing murder mystery because you're not trying to find the one killer. It's just the fact that multiple people who have no criminal records are going and killing people, and it's weird because they're all killing in the same manner in a way that's all very identical to one another. It's very creepy. There's no really jump scares, and it all feels kind of almost dreamlike in a way. There's definitely moments where you're kind of questioning if this is really happening or if it's happening in a different way that's not being shown to the viewer. It kind of tricks your mind into thinking certain things and questioning things. It's a very interestingly filmed movie, and it's definitely very different. I feel like Japanese movies had a really good streak of movies back in the days, and this was one of them. I definitely feel like they should be doing something more like this in modern day film in Japan. I felt tense throughout the movie. You feel icky, and it's just not a nice feeling, but you're also very intrigued by the mystery and also trying to solve what's going on with this detective character. There's a few other elements at play that also kind of explores the psyche of our main character that we're following. The main character that we're following is also very flawed and going through his own personal struggles that is kind of making his job harder on the field. Very intrigued by this director. He definitely made a movie that's very different from a lot of Japanese horror that you would think stereotypically. Luckily, my friend recommended Cure. I didn't know anything about it going into it, so I definitely was pleasantly surprised by it. I would recommend it to you guys if you do like crime, mystery, thrillers, stuff like that. It definitely has Memoirs of a Murder and also Zodiac vibes. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. I would recommend. The next movie that I watched was New Mutants. When was this even supposed to be released? I'm pretty sure the initial release was supposed to be at the beginning of 2019, then it got pushed. Wait, no, it was filmed ages ago. This movie had so much drama, so much mystery. I was intrigued. I knew that it was going to be a bad movie because so many people came out after watching it saying how bad it was, but honestly speaking, not the worst X-Men movie. So if you guys don't know, it's another movie that's kind of set in the world of the X-Men. This movie was quite unfairly received. There was also a lot of studio disturbances for this movie's release. There was all this back and forth between the studios, and this movie suffered the most. I'm pretty sure they filmed it like years ago. I think their initial release date was supposed to be in like 2018, 2019, I don't know, but then it got pushed to 2020, and then they kind of like released it half-assed on like a month that studios probably knew wouldn't do too well. The movie wasn't that great, I have to say, but it was entertaining. I've always been a fan of like X-Men, so even though some of the X-Men movies haven't been that great, I always felt like, you know, but it's X-Men, even though some of the movies suck. New Mutants did a very interesting take on X-Men. They went through a horror route. Obviously, X-Men is a superhero kind of franchise. New Mutants, they took a horror angle, and I thought that that was very interesting, quite original compared to a lot of other superhero movies are doing right now. I definitely feel like the superhero genre, as much as I love it, is quite oversaturated these days. There's so many movies about superheroes coming out, so you need to do something a little bit more different. Look, I had other options, but I ended up curiously watching it, and you know what? I enjoyed myself. It wasn't the best. I feel like the acting wasn't that great, but I did appreciate like the dynamics between the characters in this movie. So basically we're following a group of kids. Pretty much the main character we're following is Danielle Moonstar, and she has obviously a mutation that's unknown. We don't know what her powers are at the beginning or for the majority of the movie, and so she's taken into this facility that's holding other mutants with other obviously destructive powers, and so this facility, we're told, is trying to teach them to control their powers in order to be safely integrated back into society. And so we're trapped in this creepy looking institution. Obviously something shady is going on because we only have like one doctor, one worker in this whole facility. She's also a mutant as well, and they've basically put a force field stopping the mutants from running away. Initially it seems like it's for the better, but obviously something shady is going on, and of course these characters are trying to break free, break out of this very shady institute. Nightmarish things are happening in this facility and they can't escape. Our main character is trying to figure out what her mutant power is because she doesn't know, and also she doesn't know how to control it, so all these weird stuff are happening. Basically, creepy things happen. They're trying to escape. Yeah, it wasn't that great. I gave it, I think, 2.5 stars. I was still entertained. I did like the horror elements, and I did like the group dynamic. For the most part, they're pretty supportive in their own weird way, and they had each other's backs, and so towards the end when they kind of all team up, it kind of makes sense. Also, I have to add that they had a really good cast. Maisie Williams, of course, Arya Stark from Game of Thrones, one of my favorite actresses of recent years, Anya Taylor-Joy. We also had Charlie Heaton, my love from Stranger Things. Blue Hunt, who plays Danielle, who is the main character, is a newbie because I have not seen her in anything else besides this movie. Her acting wasn't that great. Like, it was a little bit awkward at times, and how the movie ends, it's a little bit, you know, tight little bow at the end. It was very kind of cheesy. I didn't really like the ending to this movie. The concept of this movie was intriguing, but how it was executed was a bit poorly done. The horror elements were played down a little bit. I also went into it with very low expectations and was a little bit more pleasantly surprised. I would say that it's kind of forgettable, but if you like kind of superhero movies, you know, I found it entertaining. Like I said, it's probably the fault of like a lot of studio interference. The next movie that I ended up watching is The Witch, which was directed by Dave Edgars. It's his debut film, surprisingly. It was first released back in 2015. This movie was so beautifully filmed. It is categorized under horror, but it's definitely under a subgenre of horror, like folk horror. The themes are quite simplistic. It's following a Puritan family back in New England. It's set in the 17th century. Definitely you can tell by the dialogue, the characters, how they talk in this movie. It's very kind of old English. To be honest, it sounds biblical the way they talk. It is very interesting. Even though I could follow what they were talking about, I did need the subtitles just to clarify what I was hearing and understanding. It definitely added to like the historical time period it was set in. This was such an atmospheric movie. It definitely had a very somber tone throughout the movie. Like I said, you're following this Puritan family who has been kind of banished to this remote farmland near a forest. This family is then ever so slowly invaded by this other supernatural presence. The crops are starting to die. The animals are getting sick. Of course, because of all the hardships, this family is kind of questioning their faith. To top it all up, the unbaptized baby is stolen away. They assume a wolf took it. This baby was under the care of the oldest daughter, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, my queen. I think this is Anya Taylor-Joy's first movie that she's ever been in. What's her character's name? Oh, Thomason. At the beginning of this movie, there are 5 children. There's the twins, there's Thomason, and then the second oldest sibling, Caleb, and then they have their baby brother. The baby disappears. The family thinks a wolf has taken him into the woods, and so on top of this very isolating landscape where this family are, it looks very cold and dreary and miserable. There is also definitely this paranoia. The mom of this family is pretty much blaming Thomason for everything, all their misfortunes. We have the twins, who, might I add, is just creepy in general before all this witchy stuff starts happening. I knew they were bad news, just the way they're talking, the way they're misbehaving. They're such little annoying kids. Once the baby is taken, we now have these sequences of events that are kind of tormenting the family one by one, and so it was crazy. It was creepy. It's more subtle in the horror elements. There's no jump scares or anything. The title of this movie is called The Witch, so it's kind of implied that there's going to be a supernatural element to this, and of course there is actually a witch, but a lot of the sequences of events that occur could have been not because of supernatural elements. It's also the paranoia that this family has, the mistrust they have for one another due to all these misfortunes that are happening to the family. What this film really does well, I would say, is the witch and the supernatural element taking the back seat for the majority of this movie. So a lot of the things that are occurring is like a family drama, and so a lot of the blame and the paranoia is basically the family kind of tearing itself apart. A lot of the suspense and the tension tension and the misery that comes from this movie is basically the family and what they're doing to each other. Their family dynamic is pretty messed up, and that is what's causing the vulnerability of this family. I thought that that was very beautifully done. The tension was there. It was quite unnerving at certain times of the movie, but nothing too graphic. There's a lot of like very creepy imagery here and there, but there's not like big scares in the movie. It's more like a creepy, unsettling feeling. There is a certain point where I did scream, and then eventually when the witchy stuff starts happening, it kind of got a little bit more fantastical and surreal, but at the end of the day, it was a very beautifully filmed movie. And I know it sounds weird to say that a horror movie is beautiful. It's more subtle in its horror. Like I said, it's more creepy rather than like aggressive scares, and so I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend The Witch if you like horror. There are times when it can get a little bit bloody, but it's more like unnerving. There are certain stuff that are disturbing that's more implied rather than showing outright. This was very messed up, but it also was very atmospheric and beautiful. Recommend. It's a good movie. And I ended up giving this movie 3.5 stars out of 5, I believe. Like, the next film that I watched in the month of June was I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This is directed by Charlie Kaufman. It was a 2020 release. This is a weird one. This is one that I ended up not enjoying. When I say surreal, it is very surreal. It's got this very dreamlike quality. There is a mystery behind what's going on. There's certain elements where you can't trust what the main character is seeing because things keep changing. It's very weird. I like how it was filmed. It had a very play-like quality, as if I was watching a play rather than a movie, but it was also very confusing to piece together what was happening. At the end, I kind of got the gist of what the director was going for. Man, like the dialogue, what the characters talk about and stuff, it's so melancholy and very depressing, quite poetic at times. I think the characters have a very negative view, a very sad view of life and the meaning of existence. I think it's kind of more a deep dive into the psyche of the character or characters rather than having an actual plot line. It's more of a character study. It's a hard one to explain what the story is about because you're basically following a couple that's going to one of their parents' houses, and then weird things kind of occur at this parent's house. At the end of it all, I think it's more, like I said, a character study. It's very simple, very isolated. It's very surreal and dreamlike. I definitely think that you need to concentrate more on the meaning of what things are in this film. I wasn't paying attention enough to understand the film, but I think it had a lot of elements that I thought were very interesting if we were playing with kind of like a psychological mystery, but it was a more deep dive into an emotional aspect of a person's existence. I don't know. I would like to add that the acting was really good in the movie. Superb. It's a weird one. I don't really want to recommend it, so it is what it is. If you were curious on checking it out, be my guest. I'm not stopping you, but I'm just saying I didn't really enjoy it. I did like the ending though. It's weird, and I don't know. Throughout the movie, it does have a very creepy vibe. I thought that this was going to be a horror movie. It had a lot of elements that would be in a horror movie, but it's not a horror movie. Psychological. The final movie that I watched in the month of June, I finally decided to watch this. It's The Crow. This was directed by Alex Proyas. This was first released in 1994. I don't know what came over me to watch this movie. If there ever was a phase that I went through, which was gothic, punk, emo, that would have been the perfect time to watch it because this movie encapsulates all that emo angstiness that I would have wanted during my brief moments in my teenage years that I went through that phase. Watching it now, I would say that it's a little bit cheesy. It was more style over substance, but I actually really liked it. It's funny because my dad is a huge fan of Bruce Lee. The main actor in this movie is played by Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee. Wait, is it Brandon Lee? Brandon Lee, yes. It's also really sad because Brandon Lee died on the set of The Crow. I feel like it's more pop culture because of the iconic look of The Crow. Oh my gosh, it's very goth. The way the movie's filmed, it kind of reminds me of 90s punk music videos. It was a very interesting watch. This movie is a revenge story. Our main character is a lead vocalist in a rock band, and he ends up at the beginning of the movie, he's killed. Him and his wife to be is killed for one reason or another. Supernaturally, like, he is resurrected and he is on this revenge path to kill the people that brutalized his wife before they murdered her. And so he is out for blood. And would I say that I enjoyed it? Of course, I definitely like the look of him with his little pet bird, like the crow. I wouldn't say pet, but you know, his resurrecting spirit thing. What am I saying? The main character is called Eric Raven. It definitely is set in a city that looks very grimy, gritty. There's all these criminals running loose. It's a little cheesy. I also think that the main villain was cringe level. He just didn't seem threatening at all. It was bad, but I did like our main character. I definitely felt very sad while watching it, knowing the context that he died on set of The Crow. And because of that reason, I just watched it for what it was, like a fun kind of action revenge story. And of course, it helped that you like the look, the aesthetic of the main character's costume and makeup choices, and also just like the world itself. I always like that kind of gritty gothic tone, definitely punk rockish. It's kind of funny in a way how kind of cringy and cheesy it is, but it also is kind of like iconic. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. I would have really liked this movie if I had watched it during my teenage years. I still have that punk rock emo kid in me, so I do like the aesthetic of this movie. It's very stylized. I think I gave it a little bit more leeway than I should because I know how iconic this movie is, and also because I know the sad reality of what happened to the actor. And I'm really sad because Bruce Lee also died early, so this family is just full of like tragedy, and I'm just really sad. It was definitely a mood watch. The Crow is something that's cringy but also aesthetically pleasing to what I like. The critical part of me wants to judge it more harshly than how I did, but I also like the aesthetic, and also I am a bit more biased because of the tragedies. Anyway, that was it, guys. Those are all the books and movies that I watched in the month of June. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys have read or watched any of these and loved or hated any of it, let me know in the comments below how you feel. I hope you guys are staying safe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!